What's up, everybody? It's your coach Jaron here with Forge. Today we're going to talk about the different classifications of movements that we use in your training programs, and kind of the mentality and intent that you want to have with each of those types of movements. So first of all, we have our core lifts, right? These are going to be our squat, our bench press, and our deadlift. For some of you, that might also be an overhead press, but that will be on a case-by-case basis. Now, these 3 or 4 compound movements, the squat being done to proper depth, that being the hip crease below the top of the knee, the bench press being done with a pause, and the deadlift in whatever stance is strongest for you. These are going to be treated as gold, all right? These are our barometers. These are the ways that we are evaluating your strength progression over time. In general, we want to see these numbers going up. We want to see you being able to demonstrate strength in those 3 lifts. And so with those core lifts, our goal is to really refine our technique over time to become as efficient as possible with them, and to never push them to a point where our technique or our form breaks down. This is for a couple of reasons. First, because these are compound movements where you'll be moving the heaviest loads, they pose the greatest risk for injury. Right? No training is completely free of injury risk. You can get hurt doing anything. Chances are, if you are specific and intentional with your training, it's probably not going to be here, but it is impossible to say that there is a 0% risk of ever getting hurt while lifting, especially if you're pushing yourself. But we can significantly minimize that by making good decisions when it comes to these compound higher risk movements. Right? We're never going to push a weight in a way that compromises our technique. We don't want to get hurt, and whoever stays injury-free the longest is able to train the longest, and whoever trains the longest typically gets the strongest. The other reason is that that technique breakdown will keep you from progressing, right? If we don't ever become efficient in those movements, then you will have the same sticking points, and those lifts will not continue to go up. And so with those core lifts, we're always looking to maintain and improve proper technique. Now, our second classification of movements are going to be our supplemental lifts, or our variations of those 3 compound lifts. The squat, examples of this might be a box squat, or a pause squat, high bar squat, low bar squat, front squat, or any variation like that. The purpose of these movements is to build up some aspect of the movement pattern of your main squat, right? A pause squat is going to build up strength at the bottom where people typically are weak. So if they're weak or they get nervous, they tend to cut the squat high. So a pause squat helps you to spend additional time in that weak position and build strength and confidence there. A front squat is great for improving your squat depth, your upper back strength, your quad strength, and your core strength. So if those are weak points that we assess in your main movement, we might use that. A box squat is a great tool not only for teaching a proper squat mechanic in the first place, but for also building up your hips, because you're typically squatting in a wider stance with an exaggerated amount of forward lean and sitting back, right? So that is another variation. With these variations, they each address a specific weak point, and we will typically train those for sets and reps. So we might use sets of 3 to 5 here because we're trying to build up a weak point in that movement pattern. For the bench press, variations might be something like a close grip bench press where you're bringing your grip in from your standard grip. We can bench on an incline. We can bench with our feet up, right? Each of these will build up some aspect of that movement pattern. On the deadlift, it might be deadlifting from blocks, so a little bit higher off of the ground, which can emphasize your back strength. We can deadlift while standing on a platform. It's called a deficit deadlift. This will help build your strength and speed from the bottom of the lift. We might use a Romanian deadlift, where we're just working that hinge pattern in and around the knee. We can bring the grip out wider. It's called a snatch grip deadlift, and this is great for building up your upper back strength, right? But with all of these, there are close variations to those main lifts, your squat, bench, and your deadlift, that address a weak point. When we program these in, they're often going to be set for sets of anywhere from 3 to maybe 8 repetitions for anywhere from 2 to at most 5 sets. right? Here we're going to be training these for volume. Now, I do often program some of these in for you guys if you are earlier in your training career and you're learning for the main movements, but in general, these are the parameters. Now, with these ones, because they are also compound movements that are loaded heavier than your assistance work, which we're getting to, we do still also want to avoid technical breakdown and training to failure. With these, we want to accumulate volume and slowly build up strength over time while maintaining the intent of those variations. If you're doing a pause squat and you have to cut the pause length in half to add more weight, then that is violating the intent of that lift, right? So keep that in mind with your supplemental lifts or your variations. Now, the next tier of exercise are going to be our assistance movements. And these are typically single joint isolation or bodybuilding type exercises that are designed to build muscle in places where we need it. So example being, almost everyone needs stronger hamstrings. So we might use something like a leg curl or a back extension, stiff leg, not a stiff leg deadlift, probably like a leg curl is a good example for this. The reason that we would use these exercises, like I said, is to build muscle in places where we need it. But we also, in this type of a training program, use it because we can do a high volume of work at or near failure with relatively low risk. Your chances of going too hard on a seated or a lying leg curl and hurting yourself are very, very low when compared to pushing a max effort deadlift, right? And so we can train those to a different intensity level, but we can also do a much higher amount of volume because the amount of fatigue on your entire body and your nervous system from leg curls is far less than from doing heavy deadlifts. For the example of your bench press, most people are typically weak in the triceps, which is why they have the propensity to develop shoulder injuries, because we're stronger at recruiting these than we are back here, even though the majority of our bench press strength should be coming from our triceps. And so training things like tricep press downs or close grip presses, tricep extensions, things like that, again, allow us to accumulate a high amount of volume with relatively low systemic fatigue and risk for injury. On the deadlift, it is often your hamstrings again, but also upper back. So this is where things like pull downs, pull ups, different rowing variations, again, allow us to train at or near failure relatively safely with relatively high volumes to build muscle in places where we're weak. Now, as we look at the context of a conjugate or a concurrent type program, the way that we distribute our volume or our total amount of workload between these different categories of movements is roughly 30%. We typically will do about 30% of our total volume and workload from our max effort work, about 30% of our workload and volume from our dynamic or our light speed work, and the remaining 30% is going to be done with this assistance work. And what that really does is lets us train across a wide range of rep ranges, across a wide range of bar speeds, and then also a wide range of volumes and intensities. So I hope that's helpful for you and you learned something. If you have any questions, let me know.